At a prestigious conservatory, the professors routinely looked down on Nora Winslow, a quiet new assistant with modest clothing and a habit of keeping to herself. They ordered her to clean up, scolded her over minor mistakes, and not one of them suspected that behind her unassuming presence lay a glorious past admired by the world. Until one day, during a critical scholarship recital, the star performer suddenly couldn't go on stage. With no one else prepared to fill in, the faculty reluctantly asked Nora to perform one of the most difficult pieces in the piano repertoire, a last-minute fix, with no real expectations. But as soon as Nora placed her fingers on the keys and Liszt's powerful transcription rang through the hall, the entire room fell silent. She didn't just play the piece, she commanded it with precision, emotion, and artistry at the highest level. Only then did they realize the woman they had dismissed all along was actually Nora Ellington, one of the greatest pianists of her generation, who had vanished from the spotlight after a tragic accident 5 years earlier. Before we continue Nora's extraordinary journey, if you believe that a person's true worth lies not in their appearance or status, but in their resilience and unwavering passion, then please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. With your support, inspiring stories like this can reach even more people. Now, let's return to the story, where many surprises still await. Langston Music Academy in the morning carried a rhythm all its own, the echo of piano scales from practice rooms, etudes interrupted by the sound of tuning, and the occasional sharp feedback from seasoned professors. In that space, a woman in a simple indigo dress, her dark brown hair neatly tied back, quietly made her way down the hallway. No one paid her any attention, or more precisely, no one bothered to. Her name was Nora Winslow, 36 years, old, the Academy's new administrative assistant. For the past 6 weeks, she had worked diligently, organizing sheet music, preparing performance programs, assisting backstage during exams and recitals. To everyone else, she was simply known as that quiet and punctual worker. And to Nora, that was perfectly fine. Nora, these scores need to be arranged by composer, not by date. A sharp female voice rang out. Dr. Victoria Reynolds, head of the piano department. Didn't need to look to make others feel tense. Nora nodded gently, taking the stack of music from her hands. I'll fix it right away, Doctor. Reynolds walked away, the click of her heels on the marble floor striking like the beat of a powerful metronome. Nora paused for a moment, her gaze resting instinctively on a piano transcription of Beethoven. Her fingers twitched slightly, as if her body still remembered every phrase. 5 years. It had been 5 years since she last performed on stage. Careful not to get too lost in thought, Miss Winslow, a baritone voice laced with sarcasm called out. Professor Alan Briggs, the composition instructor with his signature crooked bow tie, was watching her from across the corridor. Once you're done here, go help Miss Monroe with the scholarship program materials. And let's avoid mistakes like last week. Yes, Professor, Nora replied softly. She resumed sorting the music sheets with remarkable speed. Strange, Briggs muttered. You're working like someone who actually understands the complexity of these pieces. I've only been here 6 weeks, Professor. Gradually you pick up a few things. Nora offered a faint smile. Briggs smirked. It may sound simple, but understanding music takes more than a few weeks. It takes training, talent, and of course, proper pedigree. He turned and walked away, his final remark hanging in the air like a closed verdict. Nora lowered her head. I wouldn't dare think otherwise. The office of Professor Evelyn Monroe, the Academy's seasoned performance coach, was filled, with stacks of paper and a faint scent of French perfume. Monroe sat behind her desk, posture straight as a ballet dancer, sharp eyes framed by half-rimmed glasses. Miss Winslow. Finally, she said with the precision of a downbeat. These program drafts are a mess. I need you to retype them, not a single typo. Nora accepted the packet, its pages riddled with red ink. I'll handle it carefully, ma'am. And don't let it be like last week's concert. A circumflex was missing on Rameau's name. I was mortified to the bone, Monroe hissed, though it had been her own handwriting that caused the error. That mistake won't happen again, Nora replied, her tone soft but firm. As she turned to leave, her eyes brushed past an open grand piano and the sheet music on the stand. A Liszt transcription of Beethoven's Symphony No. 5, the same piece she had glimpsed earlier that day. Is that the piece Nathan Reyes will be performing? The question escaped Nora's lips before she could stop herself. Yes. Why? Monroe narrowed her eyes. It's quite a challenging choice for a student, Nora replied, careful to remain neutral. He's the Academy's top student. Challenge is necessary, Monroe said, staring at her. And I don't believe you're in any position to assess the difficulty of Liszt's works. Of course. I apologize for overstepping, Nora said, bowing her head slightly. Monroe continued to watch her as she left, a faint flicker of curiosity glinting in her eyes. The next morning, Langston Music Academy seemed to don a new face. A tense atmosphere hung over the corridors. Students were rehearsing until the last minute. Professors rushed between schedule changes. Patrons, dressed in tailored suits and expensive jewelry, were gradually gathering in the grand hall. Today was the Spring Scholarship Competition, sponsored by the Whitfield Arts Trust, a prize that could change the future of a young artist. Nora arrived early, wearing the best navy blue dress she owned. Her hair was neatly braided, her expression calm. In her hands was the freshly printed program, still fragrant with new paper. Thank heavens you're here, a familiar voice called out. Professor Briggs was standing near a group of patrons. Give me the programs. She handed them over. He skimmed through the pages, then immediately began distributing them. Good. Now get backstage. The students are practically falling apart. With nerves, Nora nodded and stepped into the most chaotic place in the entire conservatory, the wings of the stage. Backstage at Langston Music Academy was a world unto itself, tense, filled with the sharp breathing of nervous performers, scattered bursts of chaotic keystrokes, and the vacant stares of young musicians trying desperately to mask their trembling. Nathan Reyes, the most highly anticipated performer, sat alone on a bench against the wall, his face buried in his hands. Nora spotted him from a distance and hesitated a moment before approaching. "Nathan," she said softly, "are you all right?" He looked up. His face was pale, eyes rimmed with red. "Ms. Winslow." He swallowed hard, his voice hoarse. I'm not sure I can play today." "It's the Liszt piece, isn't it?" Nora sat beside him, her tone gentle. "I heard you rehearsing yesterday. You played with real emotion." "You heard me?" Nathan whispered. "I tried. I really did, but that fast transition, I can't control it. It's like my hands stop listening. I don't want to embarrass myself out there." Nora smiled. "May I see the sheet music?" He handed it over, hands still trembling. She turned directly to the passage he had mentioned. "You're using too much force. Liszt isn't a sledgehammer, Nathan. Think of it like a wave, rising, then receding. Don't strike the keys, invite them to sing." He stared at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Did you study here?" "No," she shook her head. "I just used to play, and I used to tremble just like you." Nathan said nothing. He looked down at the music again and whispered, "Waves, not thunder." Suddenly the sound of hurried footsteps echoed in the corridor. Dr. Victoria Reynolds appeared, clipboard in hand, voice sharp. "Places, everyone. Reyes, you're opening the program." She glanced at Nora as if just now registering her presence. "Ms. Winslow, please maintain silence in the waiting area." Nora nodded and stepped aside, leaving Nathan behind, whispering to himself, "Waves, not thunder." As the first notes filled the auditorium, Nora sat quietly in the waiting room, listening to every sound carried through the speaker system. Nathan played steadily, especially the part he had once feared. He followed the wave instead of the thunder. But something was still missing, an invisible gap between technique and emotion. The audience applauded politely, but it was not thunderous. After Nathan, the other contestants performed in turn. Some were confident, others betrayed their nerves. Nora listened closely, not missing a single note. She didn't comment, only absorbed it all, not as a staff member, but as someone whose life had once been woven with music. During the intermission, Professor Monroe arrived in a rush. "Ms. Winslow, bring this tray of water to the judges. Table, carefully. Don't draw attention." Nora took the tray and made her way cautiously toward the front of the auditorium. As she set the glasses down, she overheard a conversation between Dr. Reynolds and Professor Briggs. Reyes had technical control, but he was far too restrained in the allegro section, Reynolds said, clearly displeased. "I told Monroe her. French-style musical philosophy is outdated," Briggs shrugged. "What students need now is direct instruction, not vague talk about emotion." Nora quietly placed the last glass on the table, but Briggs had already noticed her. "Ah, our little spy," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. Reynolds looked up, her gaze stern. "Ms. Winslow, what did you think of the performance?" It was clearly a trap. But something in Nora, perhaps the echo of the music still lingering in her mind, or a quiet frustration long held back, made her speak without hesitation. "I think Nathan's technique was strong, but he hasn't yet found the soul of the piece." Briggs raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "Liszt didn't write that transcription to show off technique. It's an emotional reenactment, not just keys and notes, but an echo of Beethoven passed through the heart of the transcriber." Silence fell over the table. Reynolds stopped moving altogether and stared directly at her. "Are you teaching now?" Briggs asked, a cold smile forming. "No." Nora bowed her head slightly. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." "You're right. You shouldn't have," Reynolds cut in. "Return to the waiting area and leave artistic judgment to those qualified." Nora nodded and left without another word. She didn't see the curious expression with which Monroe watched her. A seed of doubt had been planted in the minds of those who once saw her as invisible. But just as the program was set to continue, a commotion erupted backstage. Nora rushed over to find Nathan collapsed, face pale, clutching his chest. "I can't feel anything. My fingers. They're numb," he gasped, panic flooding his features. "He's having a panic attack," Monroe said urgently. "I've seen this before." Reynolds frowned. "This cannot happen today. We need the Liszt piece. Without it, the Whitfield Foundation will pull its funding." "Do we have another student who can perform it?" Briggs asked, concerned. "No one else has rehearsed that piece." Monroe's voice was filled with despair. "Without it, we're going to lose over $2 million in scholarship funding." As the faculty argued, Nora stood silently, eyes fixed on the sheet music resting on the piano. 5 years. She had once had it all: the spotlight, the accolades, international tours. Then a tragic accident left her right hand paralyzed. Doctors said a return to the stage was impossible, but she fought, not just to heal, but to preserve the part of music still alive within her. She had never dared imagine coming back. Until now. "I'll play it," Nora said, her voice resolute. The 3 professors turned to her as if she had just said the most absurd thing imaginable. Briggs burst out laughing. You're joking, right? This is Liszt, not something for someone who fumbles tea trays." "I'm not joking," Nora replied, eyes unwavering. Reynolds stared. "You're an administrative assistant. You can't possibly—" "I know the piece," she interrupted. "I've played it hundreds of times." Monroe stepped forward, searching her eyes. "You said you've played it. Where exactly?" Nora took a deep breath. "I never said I wasn't trained in music. People just assumed." Reynolds turned away, furious. This is absurd. We cannot let an admin assistant represent the academy. What other choice do we have? Monroe whispered. It's either her, or we cancel the piece. Briggs protested, exasperated. We know nothing about her. Reynolds clenched her jaw. If you embarrass us in front of the sponsors, you'll lose your job on the spot. Is that clear? Nora nodded. No hesitation. I'll play, she repeated, and walked toward the stage. Backstage fell utterly silent as Nora Winslow placed her hands on the piano keys. No one spoke. No one laughed anymore. The mocking words from earlier had dissolved into tense, uncertain glances, tinged, perhaps, with a flicker of hope. Even Dr. Reynolds, always composed and steely, was watching her now, her expression flickering the moment she saw Nora adjust the bench with the precision of someone who had done it thousands of times before. Nora sat down. Her breath slowed. Her fingers hovered gently over the keys. A moment of stillness then. The first sound rang out, powerful, precise, and full of control. It wasn't a timid opening, nor an imitation. It was a voice all its own, resonating from the soul of someone who deeply understood that invisible language. The familiar melody of Symphony No. 5, as transcribed by Liszt, filled the hall. But unlike any version the audience had ever heard, the notes didn't merely emerge. They flowed, glided, shimmered as if painted with light. In the front row, Dr. Reynolds sat frozen, her eyes wide, her lips slightly parted. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. My God, Professor Briggs murmured, his glasses sliding down his nose unnoticed. Only Professor Monroe seemed less astonished. She tilted her head slightly, eyes glistening with a new light, as if something long suspected had finally been confirmed. She's not Nora Winslow. She's Nora Ellington. The name was whispered. Then it spread. Like a wave. Nora Ellington. The woman who once captivated all of Europe with her impromptu performances. The one Pianissimo magazine called the spiritual heir to Horowitz. The pianist who disappeared after a tragic accident, leaving behind the stage, the spotlight, and those who adored her. Now, everyone remembered. On stage, Nora wasn't thinking about fame, nor about the hundreds of eyes fixed on her. She was thinking only of what she had lost, the feeling of music flowing through her body like blood, like breath. Her once-injured right hand now moved with uncanny fluidity. Her fingers danced through treacherous arpeggios and shifted seamlessly between bass and treble lines with almost eerie precision. But it wasn't the technique that left the audience breathless. It was the spirit. To Nathan, the piece had been a test. To Nora, it was a whisper from the past, a dialogue between light and shadow, between pain and resurrection. At one crescendo, her entire body leaned forward, as if trying to hold on to something fragile. And when the climax burst forth, she let go completely, unleashing the sound like a summer downpour after a long drought. Every movement she made radiated the calm assurance of someone who had faced failure and lived. She didn't try to impress. It was this very lack of effort that stunned the room, and then the final chord rang out. Long, round, full, like a final breath before silence. 3 seconds. Absolute stillness. Then, the hall erupted in applause. Chairs flew back. Heels struck the wooden floor. Cries of brava echoed from all directions. An elderly man in the back row wiped his tears without shame. Nora remained seated at the piano, her hands resting gently on her lap. Eyes closed, not to retreat, but to feel. For the first time in 5 years, she was hearing applause not for the legend, Nora Ellington, but for herself. She stood, bowed once. The clapping grew louder. She bowed again. Amid the crowd, she spotted Nathan standing in the wings, still dazed, as if he'd just witnessed something unimaginable. Dr. Reynolds did not stand. She sat motionless, hands folded on her knees, her face drained of color. Beside her, Briggs had removed his glasses altogether, and now shook his head, laughing softly in disbelief. Only Monroe had risen to her feet, applauding with heartfelt respect. Nora offered one last glance to the audience, then slipped quietly backstage. Just as she did, Dr. Reynolds stepped onto the stage. Her face was pale, but her professional smile returned like a well-worn mask. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said into the microphone, as the applause still echoed, "I believe we owe you all an explanation." Then she turned to Nora, her gaze a mixture of confusion and reluctant respect. "Miss Winslow, or rather, Miss Ellington." Nora stepped slowly back into the light. Alone. No piano, no music, no titles, only the truth. "Yes," she said simply. "I am Nora Ellington." A new wave of murmurs swept through the room. Some sat stunned, others nodded, piecing together an old memory now suddenly clear. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps you could tell everyone why one of the world's most renowned pianists has been working as an administrative assistant at Langston Music Academy." It wasn't quite an attack, but clearly meant to reclaim the upper hand. Still, Nora didn't flinch. "After the accident 5 years ago, I lost sensation in my right hand. The doctors said I would never play again." Her voice was steady. "I tried, but I couldn't return to the stage, not while my own heart still doubted me." She paused, sweeping her gaze across the hall. "I came here to hear music again, in silence. Not for anyone, not for applause, just to see if I could still feel it." By now, Monroe had stepped on stage and quietly joined. Her sighed. "And clearly, you did feel it, and you left the entire academy in awe." Reynolds maintained her composure, but Nora saw something else in her eyes now, reluctant admiration. An older man in the front row stood, his voice deep and calm. "I'm Robert Whitfield, founder of the Whitfield Arts Foundation. I came today to discover young talent, but instead, I witnessed something extraordinary." All eyes turned to him. "Nora Ellington," he said, "I don't know if you intend to return to the stage, but if you're willing, I would like to invite you to serve as guest artistic director for our foundation. We need people like you, not just to perform, but to inspire." The auditorium erupted once more. Nora looked at him, then glanced toward Nathan, still standing behind the curtain, his eyes pleading. She smiled gently. "Thank you, Mr. Whitfield," she said. "But if I accept, I want to teach, to inspire, not to return to the life I once had." Langston Music Academy was no longer the same after that afternoon. The very next morning, a new placard appeared on the Academy's notice board. Nora Ellington, Artist in Residence. A title that had never existed before, created within less than 12 hours following an emergency board meeting that concluded just before midnight. Dr. Reynolds herself was the one who proposed the position, a move no one had anticipated. Perhaps out of fear of further embarrassment if the Whitfield Arts Trust were to take Nora elsewhere, or perhaps, just maybe, because something inside her had been awakened the night before. Professor Briggs, who once scorned Nora, now bowed his head awkwardly whenever he passed her. The sarcastic remarks were gone, replaced by stiff morning greetings, accompanied by repeated adjustments of his glasses, as if to steady himself. Only Professor Evelyn Monroe remained unchanged. She entered Nora's new office early that morning, placed a bouquet of white tulips on the desk, with no note, no explanation, just flowers. Nora sat in her new office, morning light streaming through the large windows. On the desk lay a stack of applications for the first masterclass she would teach. She flipped through them, recognizing names of students who had once acknowledged her with nothing more than a hurried nod in the hallway. Then came a knock at the door. Nathan Reyes stepped inside, sheet music in hand, his shirt still bearing creases from a rushed ironing. He smiled, a bit sheepishly. "Good morning, Professor," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Just call me Nora," she replied, gesturing toward the piano in the corner. "You brought the Liszt score?" Nathan nodded. "I've been practicing that transition again, the way you suggested. I think I can play it more smoothly this time." "Then let me hear it." He sat down and began to play. There were still a few stumbles, some rhythms not yet completely relaxed, but compared to his competition performance, it was a remarkable improvement. Especially in the crescendo section, where he had once faltered, there was now a glimmer of real vitality. Nora nodded quietly. "Better. I can start to hear you in the music now." Nathan smiled, but then he hesitated, looking at her with the kind of uncertainty that meant he was holding back a question. "What is it?" Nora asked. "I just wonder, why didn't you tell anyone who you really were?" Nora was silent for a moment. Then she walked over and sat beside him, not like a professor, but like someone who had once sat in that exact same place. "You know," she said, "sometimes people need to disappear for a while, not out of fear, but because they need to learn how to listen to themselves again. I lost that once. Music used to be everything, until I couldn't hear anything but applause. And when the accident happened, everything stopped so suddenly. I didn't know what was left of me besides a name. What made you come back?" Nora smiled gently. "A young man struggling with a Liszt piece." Nathan looked down, his cheeks flushed with emotion. "Can I really study with you?" he asked softly. "Only if you promise me one thing." Nora tilted her head. "Play for yourself, not for a grade, not to impress anyone. Every note is a part of you. Don't let anyone else take that from you." Nathan nodded earnestly. "I promise." He stood, clutching the music to his chest. Before leaving, he turned back, his eyes bright. "Thank you, not just for the music, but for stepping into the light. So I know that I can too." Nora watched him go, then turned back to the registration forms on her desk. She knew the glory of the previous day was only a beginning. The days ahead would no longer hold grand stages or glittering titles. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel empty, because now the music inside her no longer belonged to her alone. It belonged to the young souls learning to find their own voices. A month had passed since the performance that changed everything. Nora Winslow, or rather Nora Ellington, was no longer the quiet shadow in the Academy's hallways. She was now at the center of the most anticipated classes at Langston, Music Academy. Her schedule was packed with students, professors, even alumni returning from across the country just to spend an hour in her presence. Her office had been relocated to the top floor, with large windows overlooking the back garden, where flowers bloomed and piano notes from different classrooms floated together like spring winds. The sign on her door, elegantly scripted, read, "Nora Ellington, Artist in Residence." Sometimes after class, students lingered in the hallway just to hear her casually play a few phrases. No stage, no spotlight. But here, in this simple place, people finally understood why she had once held the world in silence. Her music was no longer a performance. It was a presence. One Saturday afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the curtains and lay across the floor like golden ribbons, Nora sat alone at the piano. There was no sheet music before her, only her hands and memory. She let her fingers trace the gentle contours of a Chopin melody, slowly, softly, with no pressure, no goal. Simply returning. A knock sounded at the door. Professor Evelyn Monroe entered, not bothering to knock a second time as she usually did. "I'm not interrupting, am I?" she asked, still holding her familiar notebook. "Never," Nora smiled. "Please, come in." Monroe sat in the chair, near the window, her gaze calm. "When you stepped onto that stage, I thought. There was something familiar, like I'd seen you before, years ago, at a concert in Vienna. I wasn't certain, not until the second note. Nora smiled faintly. I wasn't certain I could play until the first. Do you regret it? Monroe asked seriously. Going anonymous? Letting time pass in silence? Nora paused for a long moment. Then she shook her head. No. Music didn't abandon me. It just waited for me to come back. But this time, I didn't return for the audience. I returned for myself, and for people like Nathan. He's made real progress, Monroe nodded. I think he'll go far. Because he listens, Nora said, not just to the music, but to himself. After a while, Monroe stood and placed a hand on Nora's shoulder. Langston is lucky to have you. When she left, the room fell quiet once more. Nora opened the desk drawer and took out an unsent letter, addressed to Vienna Conservatory, Department of Musical Rehabilitation. In it, she had written that she had returned, not as a performer, but as someone who lives with music, and that she was ready to share that journey if they ever needed her. Not for fame, but because she knew what it felt like when music saves a person. She slipped the letter into an envelope, sealed it, and affixed a stamp. Then she returned to the piano. Outside, Nathan stood in the hallway, not quite brave enough to knock. But through the glass pane, he saw her sitting there, her eyes soft, her fingers gliding across the keys, as if rewriting a new chapter. He smiled, then walked away quietly. Inside, Nora paused, then closed her eyes. The final melody lingered, then melted into the air. No stage lights, no applause, only music and truth. And so, Eleanor Harper's journey comes to a close, a quiet yet radiant path, as one woman found the courage to step back into the light after half a century of silence. If this story touched your heart, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. With your support, we can continue to share more heartfelt, hopeful, and deeply human stories like this with even more people. We'll see you again on the next journey. Thank you for watching.